Right, good afternoon, everyone. We'll make a start. Hope everyone's been having a productive day and making lots of new connects. My name is Rajen Madan. I work for a company called Leading Point. We work with a number of financial institutions and really help them around data, AI, and data products. So we'll touch on why that's relevant in a bit. Was very pleased to be asked by Gab and the Finos team members to come and talk to sort of the community around our experiences in delivering change and transformation, and in particular the key role of having a very structured and sound information base for decision making, sequencing, and execution. Waltz is a famous dance form, but Waltz is also a Finos project which got created for application estate management. So we're going to talk a little bit about our experience implementing Waltz in a few organizations as a case study. And I've with me my co-founder, Thush, if you want to.
Yeah. Hi everyone, my name's Thush. I'm co-founder at Leading Point, and my background is in business architecture, so taking that strategic view across the organization and seeing how change is or is not done at big financial services firms.
Thank you. So in terms of what we had thought we'd share in some way, shape or form, a little bit of intro and relate in terms of what are some of the current issues that firms have with relating to change. We'll go into a bit more depth on what is Waltz. We'll introduce that for you. Some of the use cases we have started to see around Waltz, which are helpful for firms. There's a growing body of that. Also, from our experience, there's a real tendency to make it work for everyone. But we also want to share, who's Waltz not for, right? So why shouldn't you use Waltz from our experience, and where shouldn't you use Waltz? That's something we want to touch on as well. We'll show you some screens and views as well. Overall sort of benefits of using the open source approach, very topical given today's session. And then we'll try and give you some pit stops around if you're an organization that's facing these type of challenges. In our experience, what are the main pit stops you have to consider? So what does that value timeline look like? So we'll touch on that. And then just if we have time for you, we'll adapt given we are slightly tight on time. But would love to hear, any experiences or thoughts or different opinions based on your experience in these spaces as well, and any questions that you have. So if I look at, just introducing what's the problem with change. So change is described in most organizations. You speak to the execs, it's always termed as it's costly, it's late, and it's low predictability, right? So that's one of the it's very consistent who you speak to in terms of financial institutions. There's multiple contributing factors to that. Our focus is on the data piece. So almost start thinking about change data as an asset class. Financial institutions sweat on market data and all sorts of different sources, counterparty data, risk data, but who's actually taking charge of change data in an organization? And what is that data? That's kind of what we were trying to give some perspective to start thinking about that, because in many firms it's very siloed. There's not necessarily an approach, and it's highly inefficient. And when you start looking at whether you're planning or designing and how the cost to complete of these initiatives snowball, a lot of that contributing factor is, in our opinion, the data as well. Right? Of course, you need to look at the leadership and the cultural change and everything, but there's a very core part about getting the data right, which is accessible to a range of personas and stakeholders. So that's the problem with change, which we are trying to shine the light on. Okay, if I introduce Waltz, so we use the 3C. There's lots of acronyms to describe Waltz. So Waltz we describe is a collaborative, crowdsourced, and connected knowledge base, and essentially for capturing all information and metadata around your enterprise applications. So all the applications, the data relating to those applications, the flows. That's what Waltz was designed for. It was built actually by Deutsche Bank, who we worked for several years, and we were part of the formative years of it. It was built by Deutsche Bank at considerable cost, and they spent several tens of millions on it. And at some point in 2020, they said, actually, we would like to, as part of Finos, contribute that to the wider community. So it's now open for any financial institution to actually leverage Waltz. So that's the bit of background to Waltz. In terms of scale, it's being used by about 15 to 20,000 people in Deutsche. It's also been used by a few other organizations, here in the US and also in UK. We work a lot in the UK market. We were initially headquartered in London and now here. So it's growing in terms of the adoption. So hence why it's probably worth explaining to you. And just expanding on that a little bit further, what goes into Waltz, what does it capture? It captures all your applications information. So, and Tush in a minute can give you a little bit more details as well. It captures your people information, your org units, your functional taxonomies, your logical data models, and also the link, which is missing in most firms, the link from the logical to the physical. So it's all good to see something, as a concept saying this is my logical data model and everything should do, but actually how many organizations can really tie, that's my logical flow and what physically, how is it conforming or not? So that's information is also something that Waltz it's a very configurable and extensive data model. And they've had to go through Deutsche when they built it, confront these things over multi-years to get something. We spoke about the collaboration piece. Currently a lot of organizations are not short on tools. One of the things we found interesting when we started looking at Waltz is the collaboration opportunity it creates. So you can actually look at the board and CIO level stakeholders, have access to it. Depending on the size and scale of your organization, that could be in tens or the sort of tens of users, and they can actually use it and have that first-hand empowerment. You can have the technology team start to use it. Again, this is just giving you a sense of the scale. It can easily support 500,000 more users. The architecture team is usually in most financial institutions do have access to some sort of a enterprise architecture tooling, so they can of course absolutely use it. But then it becomes interesting because you can actually expand that for product and business users as well, and change teams as well. So that becomes quite a collaboration play there. Tush, I don't know if you want to introduce a little bit around the data.
Sure. So there's a kind of set of fundamental information here that is available in these organizations. It's just never connected together. So you'll have pockets of application information in spreadsheets, in ServiceNow, catalogs. What Waltz does is bring all that together in a structured way. So you can start to run queries around who's the owner of this application, what kind of server technology are they using. So when you get a server upgrade coming in, you can see immediately these are the 20 applications that are going to be impacted. Here's the names of those IT asset owners that I need to connect with and let them know this is coming. So rather than things being a surprise a year down the line, they're already ahead of the game. So one of the things with the collaboration, and you see there's actually two-way arrows into Waltz, is the ability to crowdsource information. So Waltz can send out surveys around any of the kind of sets of data that we've got. So you could send a survey to users of an application. And rather than having to know everything on day one, you can build that knowledge base over time by the people that are actually using the application, which is really the best way of gathering that data.
Thanks, Tush.
Yeah.
In terms of some of the key use cases, we have shared a pack, and we I didn't expect to read the anyone to read the detail, but the fundamental themes of usage are enterprise application, portfolio management. So anything to do with applications, rationalization, functionalization, releases, fating plans, lower environment to higher environment moves, moving to, so a lot of the application related flows, that's definitely there. The cost and key KPIs around that, so any organizations that's looking at efficiency and removing duplication, so that's definitely a very key driver, because you can actually get down to the nth level and understand what's driving that cost behavior, what's driving that KPI. A lot of firms that we're working with actually will start driving value, because anyone who's got a cloud and infrastructure refresh initiative underway, one of the first thing you need to do is you need to stock take and say which applications or what period, what functionality, how am I moving that data across, how am I managing that process. So that's definitely a very current in the industry that's happening. The investment management piece is around your spend allocation as well. So it gives you an ability to see the usage as well, and see what costs you associated to that as well. So if you're looking at in an environment where you've got to allocate $10, you can actually make an informed decision to say 4 of that 10 actually should go here, and here's why. And this one probably let's skip for next year, or just keep the lights on. And that kind of insight, it can really start to drive. And then finally around data governance as well. So number of firms have active CDO functions, but one of the things they struggle is, they've got their, again, logical models, etc. If you were to ask them, you've set all the parameters around, authorized and approved sources and critical elements and all of that. Can they tell you seriously how much of that estate is today conforming to that? And that's where because it can actually capture at a physical level, it can actually tell you that you are 48%, conformant, or 500 of your applications that actually don't conform to these aspects around your own data governance strategy and policy, or that you have sensitive data in plugged here. One of the organizations we've been working with, they had a regulatory submission around payments. So across the state, which application actually deals with payments, and inter-applications as well as external parties, and what level of controls do you have for that? And before, they used to actually do it with lots of spreadsheets, lots of emails flying around, and it becomes very unmanageable, and it's not correct. Their process has now been completely achieved using Waltz as well. So, and they can say, clear line of sight, this is my payments, here's how I'm moving these many applications to better controls or stop that functionality there. So again, the more you use it, the more data, as Tush said, you add to it, the better it grows over time as a corporate asset knowledge base. Maybe Tush, if you want to just introduce a few.
So these are just some sample screenshots of Waltz. So this is one around technology change. So if you're moving from one application state to another, you can capture kind of current state, interim states, target states, and what is that journey from one to the next. The next one. So for CIOs, CTOs, and CDOs as well, we can create dashboards around which bring up all these kind of key metrics on a single page.
For example, this is talking about complexity of the landscape. It's talking about, real certifications that you've done across each app and each function as well. So all of that's already built in. So then it's a question of configuring it for your usage.
So the Reg 1 is an interesting case. So you can tag regulations against applications. So you can see which applications have PII information, for example. So any GDPR or other data privacy regulation will apply to those applications. So it gives both the companies themselves and the regulators a view on that landscape at a touch of a button, rather than having analysts go out and dig out this information from 100 spreadsheets. it's available to whenever the regulator calls. So those fire drills become a lot easier. You're not spending 80 hours a week trying to pull all this information together in a hurry. You can just print off, here's the report, and send that off to the regulator. So report grids are just a way of collecting different attributes. So the Waltz data model is very extensible. You can create whatever attributes you need to. And so if you're collecting different metrics, so if it's around the kind of life cycle status, is it a buy, sell, hold, for example, you can collect all of that and generate these reports around that. So the flows is a really interesting one around lineage. So in Waltz, once you've got your applications in, you can set up which applications talk to which applications and what data flows between them. So in a very kind of quick and simple visual, you see these applications send these data types to these downstream systems, and then so on and so on. But it means now that if you've got a change to one of the upstream sources, you can see who in the downstream will be impacted. So that, wherever I've been, has always been a challenge. So when I've worked on settlement systems, there's been some change in the front office system that they've never told us about, and all of a sudden everything breaks in my system, and it's like, what's going on? But if they had this, they would know, and as part of that change process, it would be look at Waltz, look at your downstream consumers, and let them know, and that's a tick in their architecture governance box.
And just to comment a little bit on what we said, who's Waltz for and not for. So one of the things we found is that if you're a small business, less than 100 applications, or a startup or a fintech, it's probably not the best use of going through the Waltz exercise. These are just our experience, trying to put it into some sort of a structure. Often you've got, like, on the other hand of the spectrum, you've got like the big giants, the JP Morgans of this world and others as well. They can have in pockets or certainly lines of business very mature enterprise architecture. They've got lots of tooling there. If they've got high level of data sets and standards available, then you shouldn't be looking at applying Waltz as a blunt instrument to say, let's all go to Waltz. That should be very much driven by where it's going to be tricky to use their existing tool and to scale that up. Everyone knows how expensive some of the vendor tooling is and how much per user license you do. And so you're always back of the mind thinking, if I can't just suddenly open access as much as I'd like to for 500 users. So you start thinking in that way, in a much more use case way, rather than saying, I want to disrupt more I have at the moment. So that has a bit more nuanced on the extreme side, right side. And then the sweet spot is where you've got over 100 applications, and these days most fintechs have over 100 applications with all the SaaS and everything. You've got over 100 applications. You do not have necessarily a consistent implementation of an architecture or type of tooling that's accessible to everyone, that covers the whole business or can cover the whole business. That's where it becomes really, really impactful. And you can actually generate an ROI in pretty quick time. So 1 quarter, 2 quarter, you can actually show some measurable improvement every quarter, which in the environment we live in is usually, I think, more acceptable now or expected now. So that's what we would definitely say. And all the use cases that Tush highlighted, all of them are certainly open to you. So that's kind of the what we would say, as terms of the sweet spot. Some of the quick benefits, we talked about, the use cases. I guess nothing comes for free, right? So there is an implementation cost involved. It's for the organization. Well, what you don't have to think about in terms of scaling and really getting breadth of usage across, you don't have any license costs. You do get the open source benefits and the live contribution and all the fixes, etc., bug fixes, which you flag, and there's a very active around Waltz as well. We've seen, we've flagged, hey, this would be a good enhancement, and the magic of open source, someone's actually solved it and then checked it back in. So that's been really, really useful. You can create, given the groundwork that's already in there, you can actually create your own features very quickly on it. The code is relatively flexible to bend around. It's Java, Python, and that is very well supported. And I think the last one is pretty interesting because don't think of Waltz as, let me reach a stage of perfect information and data, and then I will just put it in Waltz. Think of Waltz as, let me identify a use case, let me get it going, maybe just do some initial hydration of that, and then actually get it out. And the more your own enterprise actually, through surveys and quick interaction with it, actually improves the quality of the information, it becomes a data gathering tool quite rapidly, which as a standard process, which is where it lends itself to a more like phased, quickly you can actually build it up, which is quite different than if you go and some of the big vendors that it's always a much big meaty exercise to go through. So that's probably something to as a benefit. I don't know, anything else, Tush?
Yeah, just something that's raised in the keynote this morning was around the contribution back into the open source to raise your company's own reputation as a contributor, not just a consumer of this code. So we've done some changes at one of our clients around single sign-on. So the existing single sign-on Waltz, I think, doesn't necessarily work.
Yeah.
There's almost like stub code in there. So as part of our engagement, we've had to build that, and that's going to go back into open source once we've completed that.
Yeah. And just in terms of the sort of value timeline, in terms of how we envision, we haven't intentionally not put weeks or days or months on here. It can be quite quick as well. We try and do things in 6-8 weeks sprints. So, but I think you can break this down in terms of a quick prep phase and a implementation phase in terms of getting value from this. The prep phase is really the gap analysis is essentially you identifying one of those use cases, whether it's someone's actually said, produce this report, or there's a drill, as Tush said earlier. Is that an opportunity to actually say, can I quickly use this to build this up process quickly? So that's what that gap analysis is talking about. That's your trigger to get going. And then I think there's a piece around actually an implementation partner. Because it's still a new approach, it'll take you a period of time to actually take quarter to quarters for your own teams to be trained up on this. There's no denying that, and getting familiar with that. So I think there's a stage of selecting the implementation partner or making sure you already got, if your team is already familiar or someone in your teams are already familiar with it, standing up, again, not large, but 1 or 2 or 3 people that you have access to that you can actually say, oh, I can work and build this out as a bit of a pod. So that's kind of there. And then the scoping piece is actually about ironing out for that use case what data you really need, right? What would really help generate that report, and to what level of detail do you want to get that? So that's kind of the scoping, and by line of business, or if it's just per legal entity. Then you get your, I think in prior session as well, Rajen raised some interesting points around open source. But essentially, it's about how does this fit with your existing tooling or flow, right? So you do need to have some conceptual view of where is it going to sit? Is it going to, in your environment, where is it going to sit? So that's getting there. The deployment itself can be quite quick. It's open source, so you can actually install, and it's all, that doesn't take time. It can be as quick as 1 to 2 hours, and that is there available for you, right? So once you've got that figured out. And then you start looking at really building that data for that use case. You can load the application data, people data, org data, whatever data you need, you just load that up, add some surveys to it, make sure if you want, what's your day one integration that you want, right? If you want, like Tush said, single sign-on is mandatory. Okay, fine. Now we've got the module for that already checked in. You can use that. But you just have to really prioritize and say, example, integration with ServiceNow, I would say to do that as a step 2. let's walk before we do that. So yeah, it's about just getting that integration requirements as well, and you start generating these use case and get this out, and that's where you start testing and building the data quality quite quickly. So yeah, I don't know if there's anything else from a value timeline, Tush, that you.
No, I mean, we'll cover this in kind of our experience, but it does depend a lot on, so you can deploy Waltz quickly, or as in our experience, it can take a while because you are dependent on the clients having the environment set up and all of that. But the biggest challenge is actually the data side of it. Having that data available, is it consistent? What's the quality like? So even in our experience, in our client, we've had one feed of 900 applications, and then all of a sudden there's a different feed of 800, and they're not the same. And we've got some batch job documents which don't relate to any applications in either list. So
most of the owners, half of the owners have either left the firm or they, application owners, or they're not the right owners. So it does shine the light on data quality. And so there can be those awkward moments with the teams saying, what do you mean it doesn't, I don't have this? So you've got to just ready your team or your area or the organization to say, it's going to surface where you have got issues. And you just got to be ready for that. But that is essentially the trick. You surface the issues and you say, how do you solve it? How do you get the right information in, therefore correct it or agree? And that is where it just doesn't, you can't dust this in like, under the carpet. It does surface that. And some organizations are more, they like that, and others would say, don't need to complicate my world, and just let it be. So I think that's depending on where we've worked with. There's something around the data culture as well. So some organizations do understand their data to a larger degree. Others are very reliant on some page in SharePoint or Conference, etc., and someone actually has to. So that can take some time. But the flip side is, once you get it and you get an agreement, then you don't have to go through that process again. It's there for the organization. We faced a particular thing as well around environments and deployments. Although you can get the installation and deployment very quickly, but you've got to really think about early on how you're going to run this. You're building an internal capability here, so standing up your dev environment, your test environment, and then a prod environment. Maybe you don't need all three to begin with. Maybe initially if that's for that pilot, you can do with one. But then you need to have that thinking and the standardization and the process and the people around it as well on that. I think something which Ridion said in the previous talk as well, which is maybe organization has never worked in open source before. So there are some considerations around, do you need to get some clarity on, can you work with it, and what's the role and responsibilities there? So that's kind of the main things. Yeah, so I guess like if you think in terms of, if you were to conclude, I guess for us, when we think of transformation, change, and a lot of tech work happening in organizations, we start thinking of Waltz as it's not a tool, but it's a way of actually creating processes which miss in most organizations around your data and around how that data is reporting and creating insight and helping you embed that as part of your projects and as DLCs. So it's definitely a big catalyst for that. It does start making you think about think about that change data as an asset class as well in the organization, because then you can get away from that very siloed approach. And ultimately, it's a big efficiency enabler. Think of the amount of wasted effort, any serious program, the amount of time it takes to do current state analysis, target state, decommissioning plans, releases that didn't go well because the lineage wasn't there. It's really a big enabler. So there is a very strong ROI to get from it. But you've got to build some credibility along the way. You've got to show that it actually helps something in a quarter first, then the next quarter. So that's kind of the conclusion from our perspective. Yeah, thank you for your time. I'd love
Thank you.
any questions or any thought you have.
About integration. So if you do have certain tooling in your company, right? Is the expectation that you're going to migrate all the data to Waltz, or is there any way Waltz can display the information that's available in other applications?
Yeah, so Waltz won't replace those tools. I almost think of it as a wrapper or you can take data from one source and another source, and Waltz has that relationship between the two. So you can just display it in Waltz. You'll still master your application data somewhere else, but Waltz will have that, or the copy of that, and link it to whatever else it needs to.
I think just associated to that point, we have found that where an organization discovered a new type of data that they needed, which they don't use today, but they've discovered because of this process they need to, for the moment they've started using Waltz as the golden source of that data. But everything that you've already got in authorized sources, it just feeds, it just pulls it out. So
we do have tooling for like delineation and things like that, but to your point, right, to do the initial analysis, we start with process flows, and is there a way to migrate that information from, let's say, Waltz into Calibra or into how do you export the artifact created within Waltz?
So there is it supports APIs, it supports loading from, if you've got extracts and Excels and CSVs, there's already built-in data loaders. So because, when this was being developed by Deutsche, they had faced that problem. This information is purely in Confluence somewhere, or we can do an Excel extract of it, or this one is coming from API. So there's a range of data loaders available that you can just use for that.
To get data in.
To get data in.
Yeah, it's less, I don't think there's anything in there to get data out of Waltz yet, but that's, again, it's...
If that's an important feature, then that can be stood up.
Yeah, because I can see, and we have talked about this, the visuals in Waltz are complicated, and it's not necessarily the best UI, but there's a lot of data, a lot of useful data in there that you could pull out into a Tableau report or a Power BI report. So that's just an integration that we can arrange to get built, isn't it?